Hello, I'm a chicken,
Hello, I'm Wolf.
and we're the founders of the Glacorian development team. If you're interested in knowing a little more about the both of us, please check out our first episode of the Q&A series where we introduce ourselves and explore why we want to share the story of the Glacorian universe with everyone.
If you're not familiar with the setting, we gave a synopsis of it in our first episode, and this whole series is dedicated to shedding further light on it as well.
All right, so the theme for this episode is technology. So this is a Duckaboo question. So this month we have another episode dedicated to some of the interesting questions that Discord member Duckaboo put through to us last year that we're only just now getting to. If you'd like to put forward some questions of your own, feel free to drop them in the comments of this video or over on our Discord server where we have a dedicated Q&A channel. So Duckaboo asks, before the Kothor and Gamola were absorbed into the human Glacorian sphere, were there quirks of their FTL tech that were different or more unique before being absorbed?
Well, so yes, there were some idiosyncrasies between the species. Physics remains the same, though, regardless of species, but some species implements different solutions to the same problems. So the Cathorians, for example, tend to strip down their FTL-capable ships to the bare minimum required. Effectively, they're just a chassis with a few FTL drives strapped on for other ships to hook onto. Meanwhile, human FTL-capable ships tend to be bulkier, better armored, and armed. A human FTL-capable ship would be more akin to a carrier, like an aircraft carrier, typically designed to be a cylinder that ships can dock onto either the interior or exterior of. Their armor and firepower tends to make them dangerous warships in their own right. To ensure the feasibility of long term space operations without the need to land on some low gravity object like a moon, human FTL capable ships also tend to rotate, thus providing the appearance of a gravity for its inhabitants.
So Gamolan FTL capable ships would have a lot of similarities with human ships, but with far fewer weapons and much less armor. Typically, the Gamolans focused on discovery and research. They're a species and culture that's poorly adapted to fighting for its survival against apex predators, such as Cathorians or humans. So I guess it's good for them that humanity doesn't want to eat them like Cathorians did. Uh, so Ladaren FTL-capable ships would also be armed and armored, but with a greater focus on electronic countermeasures and electronic countermeasures, or ECM and ECCM, and other stealth measures and countermeasures. In addition, Ladaren ships would tend to be more automated with very tiny Ladaren crews. So an attacking boarding party may at first think the Ladaren ship was run by an AI rather than a handful of Ladarans directing subordinate AI and other machines throughout the ship. This automation also greatly reduces the need for the kinds of life support systems that Gamolan and especially human ships would require.
So this is interesting actually because I don't think that any organic predator is actually going to be boarding a Ladarian ship in our stories. I think it's mostly the auras
Yes.
eventually.
Yeah.
But if someone were to try, they would board the ship, expect to be able to access the atmosphere, but for large sections of a Ladarian ship, there would be no
Yeah.
atmosphere because it's all machines.
That
The Ladarans don't need to be out
yeah.
there. Um, so that was an interesting
Yeah.
thought.
It's actually a
Um,
sort of defense in depth because I mean, they
mm,
still, presumably, boarding Marines would have their own exosuits, but that carries with it limited oxygen supply.
yeah, when the inside of the ship has no atmosphere, you end up having to do two sections of um, going around in your
Yep.
spacesuit, which most combat boarding parties are not planning to do. They only take enough oxygen to be outside the ship, and then they get inside the ship and they don't
Yeah.
need it as much anymore, so they
It
don't plan for
also
that.
just occurred to me, so we already established Ladarans are, so because they're more fish-like than
Oh,
amphibian, a
yeah.
lot of their livable space would be
Would
water.
actually just be underwater.
Um, and so they could also have I mean, that would also be part of the defense, even though it's like, okay, this is actually a pressurized part of the ship. Well, we still can't breathe it because there's a bunch of
Yeah.
hydrogen
Yep.
molecules connected to these oxygen molecules.
Yep.
Can't breathe that.
That's interesting. Actually,
While the Ladarians could
ooh,
move around and
that's a
defend in that perfectly well.
so a really interesting part of that that
Futuristic
I just
harpoonists.
thought of is that a hull breach of a pressurized section of a Ladarian ship, if it's full of water, the quote unquote atmosphere won't leave the ship because water in space actually has a greater surface tension property
Oh, okay.
without gravity, and so the water would, sure, it would leave the through the hull breach, but it would then basically coalesce on the outside of the ship, and so then after the conflict is done, you just suck all the water back inside the ship,
And I
patch the hull
think it
breach.
also solidifies it both part of it solidifies and part of it vaporizes in a perfect vacuum or a near perfect vacuum.
Oh, that's true as well.
So it
Yes,
would actually
actually.
be a sort of self-sealing
Oh, yeah.
interesting. I hadn't even thought of that.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
neat.
Well, so Duckaboo's second question for this month is: what is the Glacorian Shogunate's level of technological development and general state of technologies compared to modern humanity?
So for one thing, as we mentioned in last month's episode, gene editing would be commonplace during the canonical time period, which is quite some time after the Great Chthorian War. In fact, gene editing is a central part of some clans' activities.
Reliable FTL travel between solar systems would be commonplace too. However, most ships would only have sublight engines and would need to use gates located on the fringes of a solar system to catapult or wormhole them to their destination. Not wormhole in the classical sense, but wormhole in a a layman's sense. Um, Depending on the technology used within the gate themselves. With that said, independent FTL capable ships are not rare, though still uncommon, and as technology advances and FTL engines become cheaper to build and maintain, the percentage of those ships increases. There are some significant medical advancements, in large parts thanks to gene editing. These advancements allow humans to live significantly longer lives by reducing genetic factors for disease. Combined with this, the practice of good nutrition, exercise, and hygiene is more common in large parts thanks to improved education, including the education and experiences gained during one's mandatory service within the Glacorian Shogunate's military.
Space elevators would also exist, which includes their building materials, namely the strong, flexible, and durable carbon fibers that such a structure would require. Constructing a space elevator, though, is extremely expensive and time consuming, and not something that can just be done on a whim. So, while almost every planet has at least one space elevator, the poorer planets, which are typically on the fringes and are more agrarian, wouldn't be able to afford one or would have to wait a decade or more, or would have to wait the decade or more it takes to build one that they purchased. These space elevators would make it significantly easier and cheaper to transport goods off the planet. Fusion engines would be fully developed and relatively safe, though typically only used in large scale settings due to their cost and maintenance requirements. These settings would be things such as larger, typically FTL capable, starships and planet side power plants.
With all that said, it's easy to think that certain quote unquote antiquated technologies wouldn't exist. For example, it wouldn't be unheard of for a poorer fringe planet or a wealthy collector on a core planet to have vehicles powered by things such as steam or gasoline. Some co- some core planets may even have significant Luddite like groups that have lives comparable to our modern lives, but significantly less advanced than the setting's technology, making them the equivalent of, say, the Amish today.
Yeah. The third question for this month is also from Duckaboo. For both humans and Ladarans, are there any special metamaterials or production processes that are used in the setting? Carbon nanotubes are commonly referenced in hard science fiction, but it's difficult to work with them since they burn up during metal alloying processes.
Great question. So, as far as for the Glacorians, the humans, keeping in theme with the hard sci-fi stance we've taken for the development of our universe, all of our specialized materials are based on the currently known table of elements. The Glacorian shogunate does utilize several special materials in their constructions. Predominantly, though, most things are made from steel, titanium, and various optimized methods of construction using those materials. However, while Kevlar is the standard fabric of choice for combat equipment and protection, there are other options, fictional options that we've come up with that are based on modern principles. The Glacorian shogunate both grows and synthesizes modified spider silk to produce what the technical term is potassiate para-aramid fiber, which is much stronger and lighter than Kevlar, and it's colloquially called gossamer. As you've mentioned, they do also produce carbon nanotubes for various purposes, but for combat they can be made into sheets of lattices, which are used like a form of fabric. They do also produce a type of material called a cermet, which is a mix of both ceramic and metal compounds for higher strength and some extra plasticity. These cermets come in two forms, regular cermet being a mix of steel and boron carbide, which is very similar to modern combat vest plating. And then there's tungsten cermet, which is a mixture of tungsten carbide, titanium, and carbon nanotubes. This latter cermet is called hypercerm and is naturally incredibly expensive, though not prohibitively so, to procure within the setting.
Alright. So, for Ladarans, again in keeping with the theme of hard science fiction within this setting, and given that Ladaran technology is significantly more advanced than human technology, the best answer here is that the specifics of Ladaran applied materials science is not relevant. While there are more advanced options than what was mentioned above, there are no options that we can describe while conducting our due diligence. While quote-unquote magic is absolutely not an element of the setting, it's worth noting that any sufficiently advanced technology will appear as magic to an observer. So unfortunately, this means that as far as Ladarans are concerned, we basically just have to say, LMAO, we're not going to answer that.
It's very restrictive in
yeah.
order to try and actually give a hard sci-fi due diligence, scientifically grounded answer,
Yes.
because we're already stretching
Yeah.
theoretical limits without breaking the laws of physics for the humans.
Yeah, so, and the only way we could be like, okay, this advanced alien species is, we would have to retard
To make
human
something up.
development, or
Yeah.
in order to keep Ladaran development within what we, theoretical limits as we understand it right now, or just
Yeah.
make something up, and I would rather just not make something up.
Yeah.
And so instead rely on ambiguity for that. Of
Absolutely.
yeah, which I know that that can feel cheap, but that's the restriction of having to of trying to stick to hard science fiction.
Yeah. Now, our fourth question for the month, also from Duckaboo, is how much of current Glacorian technology, percentage-wise, would you say is from Gamolan, Cathorian, and human influences / origins?
Yeah, so modern Glacorian technology, that is as of 2865, certainly does owe some credit to the Cathorian and Gamolan research. When the Gamolans fled to the Glacorian shogunate for asylum, they gave all of the information they were able to take with them to the shogunate. But since they were fleeing a war of genocide, they obviously weren't able to share their entire technological database. Likewise, a lot of technology within the Cathorian warbands was jealously guarded by each warband, despite their combined efforts within the First Creed, which meant that most of their research would have quote-unquote gone down with the ship, so to speak.
Quite a lot of genetic modification technology, or at least leaps and bounds in that area, came from the Gamolans, and a significant amount of weapons research would have come from the Cathorians.
Go figure.
Although, go figure. Although it would have all been assimilated into the ongoing Glacorian research in those areas of that time, and then subsequently improved. Overall, nothing can really be said as being exactly the way it was when first developed by either faction, but instead an amalgamation of improvements and integrations over the space of about 300 years.
Which, I mean, that fits the theme of three integrated species. When
Yeah,
at some point there'd be research teams with all three species on them, and so
yeah,
yeah, it'd be yeah. So while some efforts are being made to recover technology from the reclaimed ruins of old Gamolan colonies, most of it is antiquated at this point in time, and very little quote unquote new information is being learnt from this expedition. If we were to give a percentage to the actual amount of Glacorian technology that originates from the Gamolans and Gathorians, it would be about 10 to 25%.
yeah. I think that's a reasonable conservative estimate. Um, then our fifth question for this month from Duckaboo is, um, along with overcoming the complications of coil guns to somehow make the system efficient enough to function, um, as well as the capability of making megastructures like space elevators consistently, what other examples are there of Glacorian technologies you could talk about?
Yeah, so let's be clear that resolving the issues of railguns and coil guns is not so far fetched. The United States Navy successfully tested ship mounted railguns that were combat effective. However, naval doctrine to this day emphasizes carrier and missile warfare and has yet to catch up with the reality that projectile weaponry, thanks to railguns, can potentially require an adaptation of that existing naval doctrine. A railgun slug has no real shelf life, costs a lot less than a missile, and is a lot harder to intercept, even if a missile can reach farther.
Yeah. Um, Gene editing is a major technological advancement within the Glacorian shogunate. Not only does this represent their quote unquote super soldier program, but also everyday use. Cheap and effective gene editing would allow for nearly every parent to eliminate genetic deficiencies in their children prior to birth. Something that oftentimes costs $25,000 or more in the United States would, in the Glacorian shogunate, be such a commonplace feature of most childbirths that it would just be taken for granted. It would be something that not only anyone could do, but would be so cheap and effective that very few would even consider not doing it for their unborn children.
That's a feature of even modern life that I think people sometimes don't realize or appreciate. There are
Mm.
problems that our ancestors or that we have solved,
Mm.
um, especially in
Absolutely.
recent history, that are so solved we don't even consider them a problem anymore.
Actually, there was a really good story I heard about the guy that invented washing hands. Now, that sounds funny,
Oh
but the
yeah,
guy that invented washing hands noticed that a lot of women were dying in childbirth from an infection that was only seen in, well, it was associated with necrotic tissue. And
yep.
they were like, what the heck's
It's
going
because the
on?
surgeons,
Um,
medical
the
doctors,
surgeons
yep, they
were cutting open dead people,
and they
not washing their hands, and then delivering
and they
babies.
were using that, so that was considered a badge of experience for them, of like, look, I actually understand what a
Mm.
body looks like on the inside
Yep.
because you can
Yep.
see my filthy hands. um
Yes.
and yeah,
Yep.
that was a hospital administrator that he was hired to solve that. In fact, I think it was that specific problem he was hired to solve.
Yep.
And
And
he
so he,
they hated him, like he was hated.
yeah,
it,
they
it
did.
wasn't
He
till
got in a lot of trouble. He
yeah
actually lost his job.
it wasn't till afterwards, and of course he didn't get wasn't around that much to really, I guess, bask in the glory. Which a lot of
Mm.
people that make groundbreaking stuff, they're literally ahead of their time, and they don't get the benefit of that, whatever their groundbreaking breakthrough
Mm.
was.
Mm.
But yeah, that was, thank God for him.
We'll actually, we'll find a video essay. I know that there's one in particular that I watched. We'll find a video essay on YouTube and we'll link that in the description of this video.
Yeah, like, thank God for him. That
Yeah.
that was a huge advancement. So, cybernetic enhancements are another major technological advancement. Like above, things that we would marvel at are simply a matter of course and take it for granted by the average person in the Glacorian shogunate. For example, people that are born blind would have easy and cheap access to effective cybernetics that allowed them to see normally. By means of another example, the paraplegic would have access to reconstruction and cybernetic options that would allow them to interact with the world as if they were, well, not paraplegic.
um, Space elevators are not the only quote unquote megastructure that the Glacorian shogunate can construct. Due to the demands of FTL engines in the setting, most ships are not FTL capable and instead rely on FTL capable carriers. These carriers are megastructures in their own right. Massive, rotating cylinders with multiple docking hooks, weapon systems, armor, habitation districts including food production, and waste management. They would very nearly be quote unquote cities in space, particularly when accounting for the fleet of non FTL capable ships that would accompany it. Another example of advanced Glacorian shogunate technology would be the form of radiators they use in their ships. Heat management is a major factor in space exploration, and thus radiators would need to improve. One advanced radiator used on certain military ships would involve ferromagnetic microparticles that rotate through a ship's coolant piping out into the exterior, that is, space, and back into the ship. This is done using electromagnets. And would effectively radiate the ship's excess heat into space thanks to the massive surface area of those microparticles getting filtered.
Yeah, so heat radiation is not normally effective in space, but
No,
once you
it's not very efficient.
massively increase the surface area, it actually
Mm.
becomes a viable option. But you basically
Oh,
need
yes.
tiny, tiny particles about the size of a grain of sand or a little smaller
Mm.
to do it.
Mm.
Um, yeah. So our final question for this month, also from Duckaboo, is as of roughly 1,200 years ago in the current Canaan, what were the technologies that the Cathorians had on their average ship? In what ways were they quote unquote advanced technologies, or were they more akin to modern capabilities?
So, 1,200 years ago, prior to the modern Glacorian shogunate, would put us in 1665 AD, where the Cathorian warbands were at the height of their interstellar colonization. For context, this is about 500 years after the Cathorians built the first structure on their moon, which was then shortly annihilated in a nuclear war. Because of the constant infighting. Because of the constant infighting and resultant loss of technology amongst the disunified warbands, the Cathorians struggled to progress. Unlike Earth, whose most abundant resource is iron, the Cathorian homeworld of Donran had much greater access to titanium and tungsten, and so their materials scientists had a difficult time alloying and modifying these materials to meet advanced specification needs. However, an abundance of titanium lent itself to some accelerated development of certain systems, such as very rough FTL capabilities via highly inaccurate gates. Other technologies include spacecraft portable fusion generators, magnetically accelerated weapon systems, and man-portable exoskeletons.
Generally speaking, however, the most commonly available industrial product within the warbands would have been equipment comparable to our modern day capabilities. Though that's nothing to sniff at, the space exploration technology currently available to both our civilian and government audiences is far more advanced than we're led to believe. The developments that were made with the conquest of the Gamola come from two factors. The first is that many Cathorians were initially tutored by Gamolans, and their scientific prowess was honed to the point of being able to invent new and terrible weapons quite quickly. The second factor is that a lot of Gamolan technology was then stolen, and a fraction of it eventually reverse engineered.
The Cathorian technology designed as a result of newfound intellect are within the realm of stabilized ship-bound FTL systems and FTL communication systems. Exoskeletons and weapon systems were also improved. As for what was stolen, some of the wealthiest Cathorians, aka the war chiefs, would have access to genetic therapy suites and advanced medicine that far outpaces our modern day capabilities. We don't have a metric for the specifics of that, but just in general, we're able to describe that. Um, However, access to these technologies was still unbalanced, and the better stuff was limited to the stronger and therefore richer war chiefs. When the Glacorian shogunate and Cathorian warbands first engaged, the access to equipment a Glacorian citizen would have would have been slightly better quality than an average Cathorian, but when comparing the cream of the crop, the Cathorians did have a massive upper hand.
So those were some of the questions we've had sent to us through our Discord server. A link to the Glacorian Development Discord server is in the description of this video. If you want to come check us out or get involved in the community, it's open to everyone. In addition, we will include a link to our Patreon for those interested in supporting our efforts.
If you have any questions or simply want to follow our progress as we develop media for this universe, please join us on Discord. If you want to support our efforts and can afford it, consider our Patreon. Thank you for listening.